So in the book of Job, you see, Job gets all angry at God, as opposed to the story, and demands of God why all these bad things should happen to him, being true and faithful, as Job calls himself. And he's true, he is being true and faithful, and so he demands that God explain himself, as it were. And God arrives out of the whirlwind, it says, and says, "Hey, who are you to ask me?" Well, in our free church tradition, we take very seriously that old political saying, vox populi, vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God, and you're the people, and I've been questioning you for a long time, so it seems only fair that you question me in return. And so some of you have sent in questions, all of which deserve longer answers than I'm going to give you this morning. But it's also good. It's not only good in that democratic sense, it's good in that I can very easily think of things to say, but if they're not on your mind, they really don't matter. So unless you tell me what's on your mind, I don't know if I'm speaking to where your heart is, because where your mind queries and wonders, your heart is caught up in it too. So I have a few of them here, and I hope I can answer a few of them in some way. I may not be able to answer them all, even the ones I've chosen today, but they have shaped my mind. One questioner says, how can liberal religion find ways to embrace American capitalism and inspire our youth to become business leaders? Does our church really appreciate those who bring a conservative approach, perhaps, to their business? The question is longer than that, but that captures the essence of it. This is a really huge challenge. It's a huge challenge because we use the words liberal and conservative to cover a lot of territory. And liberal religion is not the same as liberal politics, and conservative religion is not the same as conservative politics. And I think it's helpful to distinguish between liberal and conservative as ideological points of view, a platform, as it were, of beliefs over here, a platform of principles over there, and what I prefer to call a liberal and a conservative temperament. That's important because I think what the world needs are more people of conservative temperament, while we need just as many people of liberal point of view. And the reason I say this is that I think that the conservative temperament is not one that is pro or anti this, but is innately, shall we say, skeptical of all claims of truth. The conservative temperament are all those people from Missouri. Show me. Make your point. Argue it out. Give me evidence. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, famously accused of being a liberal, in many ways was, had a wry answer that said, a liberal is someone with both feet firmly planted in the clouds. And that's a liberal temperament, without question. But I would say, and here's where my conservative temperament, which is skeptical, meets my liberal ideology, that capitalism, the way we've treated it for the past 30 years especially, has amounted to a religious dogma. We assume it to be true, we assume it to be good, we assume it to be correct. In this week's New York Times, a professor at the famous University of Chicago, where the rational market theory has been dominant and has dominated our country for the past 30 years, is suggesting that maybe that's an article of faith rather than an article of fact. That maybe people make irrational decisions, like paying gigantic amounts of money for houses. And maybe we ought to question the ideology, and that itself is a conservative response to a conservative piece of ideology. Does that make it liberal? Well, maybe. So I'm suggesting that anytime we confront a belief, economic, political, social, or religious, that strikes us as being offered as being self-evident, obvious, and not to be questioned, we of conservative temperament ought to be saying, how come? Are you sure? Show me. That's true of religion, that's true of social policy, that's true of economic policy. A generation ago, you would never have had anyone suggest that we could have legal marriage between two gay people it would just be impossible. We weren't ready for it. And lo and behold, 6 states have already said no to that. Every month I stand on the plaza of the Cook County Clerk's office to ask silently whether or not we will be number 51 in answering that question. I include the District of Columbia. Who knows, maybe Guam will get religion before we do too. But again, I'm questioning the status quo. So, to the questioner, if you're talking about capitalism as a theory, as an ideology, I think we do need to question it. Not just here, but in other congregations, because I think the religious point of view is larger than an economic point of view. Question it does not mean scuttle it. It also means that when presented with evidence that sound business sense is sound, we should say, as H.L. Mencken was supposed to have said when asked if he would be found himself after death facing the 12 apostles, his answer was, "Gentlemen, I was wrong." What is the meaning of life? Heck if I know. There is a popular story that the difference between a philosopher and a theologian is that a philosopher is like a blind person in a dark room looking for a black cat, and the theologian claims to have found the cat. That is not quite so preposterous as you think, because anyone who's ever owned a cat knows that you don't find a cat finds you, especially if you have food. Let's admit, and I think this is where we need to begin, that there is a dark room to begin with, that we don't know, in the sense that we know with clarity other things, the meaning of life. That we do not know whether life even has a meaning or a purpose or a value. And this is hard to admit, that we don't know whether it has meaning or purpose or value. Most people walk into a church assuming it does, and they're looking to get a persuasive version of it. So the first question that we should be asking is, could life, our lives, have meaning or purpose or value? In a sense, we're asking the same question about if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it matter? If our lives were to end, would they matter? And they will end. And we have to ask ourselves the question. This is where the religious quest begins. And it doesn't begin with, do you believe in God? That's a conclusion, yay or nay, to a conversation you've been having in your heart long before you walk through the door. Likewise, the Bible, is it true or is it false? That's the conclusion you've reached after you've had these other questions. And I think our job is to make sure the original questions don't get assumed to be true or assumed to be false, but held up as the dark room they really are. Does existence matter? How could we know it matters? It's an uncomfortable place to be. But no one said the truth was an easy chair.